Hi, and welcome to The Parent Equation with me, Aisha Murray. I'm a coach and I primarily support working parents and carers who believe that parenthood shouldn't be a barrier to a successful and fulfilling career. In this podcast series, I chat to inspirational working parents and ask them to share their own experiences of raising children alongside their careers. We talk about the struggles and the moments of joy. And I hope in each episode there's something that can bring you a bit more strength and positivity. So please follow, listen and subscribe on all major platforms. So welcome to this edition of The Parent Equation. I'm really happy to be joined today by James Millar. James is a father of two, a journalist, the author of The Gender Agenda and Dads Don't Babysit, and also the editor of workingdads.co.uk. Which sounds like a lot on your plate, James. So welcome and thanks for being here.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. It's not that much. The books are all done. I have to say at the start of this year, my New Year's resolution was to write another book. And that went out the door on the 4th of January when schools were sent home. One of my shortest lived New Year's resolutions. But when I get around to it, then that'll be a lot of work. But
well, hopefully schools will go back. I promise you, schools will go back. And then hopefully you'll have at least half a year where you can write that book.
Yeah, I might have lost the urge by then. That's the trouble. I had that new year. Right, this year I'm going to do it. I've been pondering an idea for a long time. I was like, right, I'm going to do it, and then bang, away it went. But that's life for working parents at the moment.
It is. And how long does it take you to write a book then? So your last one, which was Dads Don't Babysit, which was a couple of years ago. How long do you think it actually takes you to put all that together and get it launched?
It depends, really. Yeah, I mean, the last one, first conversations must have been had in 2017, and then did we get it out a year later? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It was very quick. Maybe it was a couple of years, but it depends. It's books are weird because you write it and you think that's it finished. That's so not it finished, because then you've got to do all the editing and all that sort of stuff, and then you've actually got to sell it. That's the hard bit. That's the really killer bit, because apart from anything, it's not really my thing, and yet you have to go out there and say, read my book, buy my book. Actually, don't really buy it, give me money, essentially.
Marketing yourself is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah,
it really is. It really is, because we're not necessarily, that's not what we're here for, is it? So
No,
you have to learn something.
Yeah, I don't know. I won't give away what the idea is, but we'll see if it turns into a book. It might also be a podcast, but there's a lot of them around, so I don't know. We'll see.
Good. We'll stay tuned. We'll stay tuned either way.
Let's get through lockdown, and then I'll think about it.
Yeah, then we'll work on it. So James, obviously you're immersed in campaigning, if that's the right word, for, I suppose, the rights of working parents and especially working fathers. And that's obviously a passion I share, hence why you're on my podcast today. So just to start with, do you think, what's the changing face of working dads that you've experienced over the last few years?
Well, one of the things I don't want to pick you up right at the beginning, but although yes, absolutely, I'm all about the rights of working dads. The reason I'm all about the rights of working dads is to help working mums, or to help women and men and everyone. This is, and it's a tricky one because I don't want to seem picky, but you have to be clear that the reason I'm interested in making life better for men is because it will make life better for women and their children, everybody's children, and everyone. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's changed in recent years, is that people are switching on to that and realizing that if you are to close the gender pay gap, if you are going to help women progress in the workplace, or to have genuine choice about what they do in terms of work and domestic life, men are a massive part of that jigsaw. You've got to tackle that issue, and I think things are changing. I look back, I don't know how I ended up with a 13-year-old. I'm just a young man. I've got a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. How did that happen? I can't be that old, can I? But when my 13-year-old was born, I had 2 weeks of unpaid paternity leave.
Yep.
When my 10-year-old, in 2010, I had 2 weeks of paid paternity leave. So things were changing there. 5 years later, of course, shared parental leave came in, and that's not made a huge difference, but the fact that it's there is quite important. And we are seeing now more and more companies. I mean, I am sort of surrounded by it, because it's my job. Working dads, we're very much about sharing best practice and flagging up people that are doing the good stuff for dads and families. But we are seeing companies taking it seriously now, increasingly. It's interesting. It starts in the city, I would suggest. There's a lot more banks and such like. So, Aviva obviously come up time and again.
Yeah, they do.
Because and fair play to them, because they're really good at it. Often say to other companies, it's like, look, people sort of roll their eyes. Oh, why are we talking about Aviva again? It's because they're doing really good stuff. You do the really good stuff, you'll get all the good publicity as well. But they do, equal parental leave. They don't. Key to what Aviva do, and to be fair, it's not just Aviva. I mean, there's people like Zurich are also very good on this. They normalize it. They don't just say you can have 16 weeks of parental leave. They say, why are you not taking it to the men, to the men that are becoming dads? They show case studies. So they really, it's through the DNA of the company now, and that's quite important, obviously, given we're going into what looks like already in tricky economic times, very weird economic times. But if it's through the DNA of the company, then hopefully we'll stick with it, and I think they will. Seeing quite a lot of interest, in fact, in D&I stuff in the current climate, which is very positive and hopeful. But yeah, it's interesting that it's starting in the sort of big city corporations to some extent. I think that is fascinating, because I think you will begin to see a trickle down from there. I know trickle down economics are controversial, but I do think stuff will trickle down. So I think it's interesting that it's starting there, and I think it will begin to spread more and more, and it is catching on in some perhaps unexpected places. I've spoken to sort of one sector that I speak to quite a bit about this, because they don't know how to deal with it, is construction.
Right.
Now, the sort of stereotype is of your brickie who has no interest, goes out, builds walls, and is, goes down the pub with his mates at the end of the day and doesn't have a lot of interest in all this. And of course, that is absolute nonsense. Construction firms are really struggling with this, I find, because they're sort of going, well, their workforce is largely male, and they do want flexible working. They want a better work-life balance. And the construction firms are sort of going, well, how do we do it? And they really, and I sort of say to them, it's not that hard. And I think, it's interesting that they want to do it. That's a great sign. But they sort of feel like it's something, flexible working and stuff like this is sort of something foreign. But you just sort of say, well, why not? You can have a job share. Somebody can come and build a wall from 7 till 1. I mean, I appreciate construction is more than just building walls, but just as a very simple case example, somebody can build a wall from 7 to 1. He can go home. Somebody can go in and build a wall from 1 till 5.
Different wall.
You end up with a wall at the end of the day. And I appreciate it, clearly it's more complex than that. In many cases, some cases it's not more complex than that. But there's a sort of feeling that it is somehow weird and foreign and difficult, but it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. I think your use of the word DNA actually is really interesting, because I think I've come across this time and time again and spoken to many working fathers who said that even though their employer advocates flexible working and has parental leave and has all the tick box exercises done, they know that if they actually ask for any of those things that they're entitled to, they will feel like they are going to miss out on promotion. They are going to so miss out on management opportunities. They're going to be out of the loop for too long, and their employer doesn't support that. So when you talk about the DNA, that makes it part, as you said, the fabric of the company then believes in that. It's not just a tick box exercise for HR to say we offer all these rights and let's go. So how do you think even those companies who are paying lip service to it, how can those companies really make it part of their DNA?
It's well, first of all, you have to buy into it, right? You have to believe in it. As you say, it has to be not just a tick box exercise, and that involves making the case for it, because it works. Companies who have have diverse workforces, who have diverse leadership teams, are more successful than those that don't. And there's plenty of evidence out there for that. I think it can seem almost counterintuitive if your leadership team are all, male, pale, and stale. It's very easy to hang around with the same people, and hire people like you. But I say there's plenty of evidence that won't work. I think this is one where legislation does have a role. I don't think legislation is not necessarily always the case, and not always helpful to say, government do something. But we have seen, gender pay gap reporting did make a difference. Companies were shamed into doing something about it, and were embarrassed to say that they had a massive gender pay gap. And obviously, the government has rolled that back, and I think we all need to be very wary that they're going to try and dump that, and if they do, then we need to shout and make sure they don't, because what they need to be doing is going further and actually making companies publish their parental policies and publish take up as well. Is crucial. It's not just about saying yes, we, as you say, we offer 60 weeks of paternity leave. How many people are actually using it is really important. And that's, it's the power of role modeling, which is massive. And that's something I find throughout this, is that the number of dads I speak to who have taken shared parental leave or gone flexible or whatever, they do it because they see somebody else do it, whether it's in the company, or whether in their circle of friends, or they've talked to somebody or whatever. The power of role modeling is massive in this.
And we have to hold people accountable, as you say, for proving that these things are happening within their companies.
Absolutely.
So just moving on, I suppose you've talked about employers being supportive of working fathers. We're now in a role, or working parents rather, we're now in a world where we are having to work flexibly, in inverted commas, because we are remote and we are using technology far more than we did before. Have you seen, from personal experience and also from talking to the working parents that you do through your career, the impact of this new remote working, the impact that's having on family life, and potentially the balance between the primary breadwinner and the primary carer, for want of a better word? Have you seen the impact of that?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It's really, I mean, here's the good thing, right? I get to share my desk with the best co-worker I've ever had. I mean, in some ways he's awful, because he gives me a running commentary on whatever he's doing, and he asks questions all the time. It's not particularly helpful for getting work done, but there's nobody I'd rather have sitting at the desk opposite me than my 10-year-old. I did find the last lockdown actually harder because in November, because usually I find I work better if I sort of go out to a cafe, not all the time, but once or twice a week, and I find the walk there gets my brain working, and for whatever reason that environment works well for me. But of course we couldn't do that in November, so it was literally just sitting at my kitchen desk looking out at a bare garden, the same bare garden,
wintry garden,
and it was boring. In many ways it's not better now there's homeschooling, but there are elements of it that are better. However, there's a lot of downside to this, let's face it. The biggest one, of course, is that we know that women are being hit harder because women are having to do more caring. That's why they're being furloughed or losing their jobs. And this, it drives me absolutely nuts. I mean, it's things like, I think WhatsApp groups are really interesting, actually. I know there's a lot of sort of issues around WhatsApp groups, but I do think they're interesting for sort of getting a taste for what's going on, and I think they're very interesting in terms of gender dynamics. But I see the class WhatsApp group and the mums, mainly mums on there. I've written before about why that is not good, and it shouldn't be the case, and all the dads should be in the class WhatsApp as well. But I see the mums on there saying, they're getting run ragged, and their husband just shuts himself in the office because his work is so much more important, and he's probably got a full-time job and is the primary breadwinner, and so somehow gets to just go, well, my job's more important. That's not okay. My house is weird because I'm the part-time worker and the primary caregiver, and my partner is the primary breadwinner. But she doesn't just lock herself away and go, I've got work, get on with it. We talk to each other and say, well, I've got a meeting here, you've got a meeting there, who's going to be around? I mean, maybe we'll come back to this, but communication has been key throughout this whole experience. So no, I'm seeing a quite difficult impact on family life, I think. And I think there's an interesting sort of specific impact on men, which I think sort of speaks to the imbalance, which was we ran a series on working dads called Working Dads in Lockdown through September, October, sort of garnering experiences of how it had been for people with the first lockdown and how they'd coped. And the thing that came up time and again, which I hadn't really anticipated, was the lack of commute. A lot of men said they really struggled with the switch from home to work.
Definitely.
They really, actually, there was a value in that, whatever, what's the average 40 minutes in a car, on the train or whatever, and they could sort of mentally switch. And, they didn't like having to sit on a crowded train or sit in the car, but that sort of space they really value, turns out. Now, we need to engage with that and say, okay, well, what's going on there? Why do men need this time to switch? And why is it specific to men? That doesn't seem quite right. And how do we tackle it? Because through lockdown, a lot of women didn't get the option to do that. The mums who were sitting at the kitchen table, or like I have been recently, you can't get any work done. You're expected to switch, minute to minute to, when your co-worker sits there and says, I can't do this maths, you've got to switch out work, and then you got to switch back in again, and it doesn't work. So I think there's something very interesting going on there, and I think we need to look at why that is. And I wonder if it's to do with men, men's experience of home life, of the domestic sphere, because one of the ways that we avoid the imbalance in the way that men and women, or mums and dads, experience lockdown is that men need to do more around the house. That's fundamentally, men need to do more domestic work, because we know they don't do enough. They don't do as much as women, and
so
therefore
talking about needs to do rather than want to do.
Yeah, absolutely need to do. We know men don't do as much as women, and as far as I'm concerned, that means they're not doing enough. Because why should women carry the domestic burden, other than obviously huge pressures and stereotypes and all the rest of it that trickle down through the centuries. But we know men did more in lockdown, and that was good. But they need to be it needs to be getting somewhere near equality, if that's how you want to live your life. Of course, I'm always wary of being accused of telling people how to live their life, and I certainly one of the things I've always said throughout this, talking about stuff like flexible working, is that if you want to go to an office and work 9 to 5, that's a perfectly valid choice, but it has to be a genuine choice. The same as if you want to live in a house where dad goes out to work 9 to 5 and lives, you live a sort of 1950s style setup. If that works for you and you like that, that's fine. But for most people, it doesn't work, and most people don't want to live like that. And so we need to have those other options, and that means equality in the domestic sphere as well as out with it. And the domestic work thing, I think if men were more comfortable around domestic work, and that includes childcare, I think, then they wouldn't have such a problem with that switch. And then it all starts feeding into all sorts of other issues, like how do you get men to be more comfortable in the domestic sphere? You give them more paternity leave, and then they get more used to being a dad, and they get more confidence. Again,
and it becomes more natural.
How are you supposed to get good at being a parent in 2 weeks? You can't. That's ridiculous. Yet that is currently the setup. It's not about pointing the finger and saying, men, do more, you're rubbish. It's about saying, how do we help men to live the life they want to live, as part of a partnership and part of a family.
I think it probably takes about 18 years to become a good parent, doesn't it? I imagine, not 2 weeks. If that, more. One of the mantras that I dole out all the time, and it surprises me the number of people who don't know it, is good enough is good enough. I think that's been key through lockdown, but even before lockdown, it's sort of quite a good parenting mantra. You don't need to be the best mum or the best dad in the world. Good enough is good enough for kids. And the other one is, it is what it is. It is what it is. That's the other lockdown phrase for our family.
Yes, and something to do. That's the other thing we come out with. Is like, well, shall we? We're talking about. I don't know. We were going to have like a sushi night at home, because my daughter likes sushi, and it was like, oh, I have to go and get the special fish and put in the effort to make it. It's like, well, it's something to do.
Yeah,
you know,
it's just true.
Anything is something to do. I mean, the other day I was cleaning the windows. I was like, well, it's something to do. Isn't it? You know, can't do anything else.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you just touched on it earlier. Let's talk about communication in that case. So again, my personal family setup, communication is vital, as you've just alluded to, and we always say, or more my husband says, we are a team. We're all in this together now, including our new dog. He's part of the team too. So we have to communicate, and we have to check in with each other, and I suppose empathize, understand when we can step in to help, all those kind of things. So what's your view on communication, as you put it earlier?
I'm thinking about getting a tattoo that says, I'm not really, that says CKC. This is I'm trying to work out how this works, but this is the catchphrase: is communication is key with COVID. I think I haven't quite worked there. It's something in there. I haven't quite figured out how it works, but yeah, I mean, throughout all this, communication is key in lots of different ways. So it's absolutely about talking to your partner and figuring out. We haven't been so much in this lockdown, but in the first lockdown, we would sit down on Sunday night and work out what is the homeschool timetable. You know, what work's coming in. You know, what meetings have we got, and so on and so forth. That's important. I think it's important to talk to the kids, explain to them, I've got a meeting. You know, you're going to have to work by yourself for now. As long as they know who's available when and what's expected, then I think that helps. And indeed to talk about, you know, just the general weirdness that we're in, that they understand that we're all finding it very weird. But in terms of work, there has to be communication there as well. So, you know, as an employee, you need to be talking to your employer and saying, you know, this is my situation, and you know, therefore I won't be able to, for example, at the moment, I don't really do much work in the morning because I'm doing homeschool. I start work at about 2 PM, you know, work through till tea time, which get increasingly late because of that. And pick stuff up in the evening as and when it's needed to, you know, as long as you explain what you can and can't do, I think that helps. And an employer needs to be speaking to their employees, doing exactly the same thing, saying, look, I mean, I think it's better if it comes from the employer in the first instance, saying, what can you do? When can you do it? And just having an open and honest conversation is really helpful. And, you know, unfortunately, I think some people are discovering their employers are not capable of that. And that is not good, and something to think about going forward, I think, is, do I want to work for this person? And of course, I think the other way around, I'm sure some employers are finding their employees are not particularly helpful. But yeah, so it's got to be, it's communication across the board, just all the time is sort of the key element to this. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned empathy, because I think that's another big sort of theme going forward. I wonder, I think it ought to be a key plank of building back better. I wonder how much it's going to be. Certainly the sort of end of last year, it felt quite a big thing. And now, I don't know, but I think we're all a bit scrambled at the start of this year. So I think everything's sort of gone, you know, all the pieces have been thrown up in the air again, and we'll see where they land. But yeah, I think empathy is interesting, precisely because of those conversations that hopefully people were having, instead of just turning up at work every day. You know, employers were now having to say, "Oh, right, you've got kids. Oh, right, you've got a puppy. You know, that needs to be taken out. You know, how's that going to fit with work or whatever?" And hopefully being a bit more empathetic. Okay, so how can we make work fit into this, or life and work? How do we make them fit together? So yeah, I'm sort of keeping a close eye on empathy. I think that could be a big theme. And I wonder what the timescale might be on that as well. I don't think everybody's suddenly going to become empathetic in the next 6 months, but I think we might be looking back in 5 or 10 years' time, going, that was a key change that has sort of played out over time in how workplaces you know, operate. But yeah, I would like to
it's also something I've mentioned many times. If anyone's listening to my podcast regularly, they'll have heard me say this before, but empathy within a family as well. So when my first lockdown, when my husband was at home for the first time last March, and I was exposed to his 9 to 5, to what goes on in his world when he's at work, and hearing the conversations he's having on his Teams meetings and that kind of thing. And it gave me a completely different perspective as to his his world, his day world. Normally I wouldn't see because he'd be out of the house, and vice versa. I think we talked about the domesticity issues before. He is seeing how a self-employed working mum, in my case, at home, is juggling the laundry and the picking up the kids from school and trying to fit in, as you say, half an hour work here and there when she can. And for us, because we communicated and consider ourselves a team, we talked about it, and it's definitely helped, I think, strengthen us seeing the other side, which normally we haven't seen the other side really for years because we never had to.
Yeah, I mean, we published the results of our survey back in November, and there were some really interesting. There's some quite a lot of write-in answers, which is interesting because one of the things about men is they don't tend to fill in surveys, they don't tend to speak up, and that is a problem. But there was more. You have all the tick box questions in the survey, and then at the end it's have you got anything else you want to say, which invariably gets left blank by men. But there's a few more of them, and some of them were interesting, and some of them were tragic. There was the man who said, he spent more time with his family in lockdown than he had in the last 12 years put together. And you just thought, but he also said he now appreciated what his wife had been doing for that 12 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
She was doing something. Yeah.
But he was going to try and change his life to be around more going forward. Okay, that's the positive out of all this, is that absolutely we're hearing a lot of men saying, they actually liked being around their families more. And they want to spend more time at home, and they want to do more flexible working. And there's a slight problem sometimes with just mixing up flexible working with home working. Being interchangeable. Home working is a form of flexible working. There are all sorts of other ways of doing flexible working. But men seem to be keen to do more going forward. And I think one of the themes, it's hard to put timescales on this stuff at the moment, but is how do we help men to do that? I mean, that's one of the sort of out of the Working Dads and Lockdown series that we did. I sort of drew up a plan called Building Back Better. How do we make it happen? Because I think it feels like we're in a spot now where we have to make it happen. We can't let things. It'll be very easy to go, God, I'm really tired from lockdown, and that's understandable. And then, all right, who knows how the future is going to play out? But say, in 6 months' time, we're able to go back to offices, and everyone just goes, oh, let's just go back to how it was.
Go back to normal.
That would be easy. Normal, but and that would be understandable. Those of us who sort of want something better, I think, need to be drawing up plans now and saying, right, how do we entrench the changes, the good stuff that we've seen? So that's making it easier for men to do flexible working. Empathy. How do we make that a part of workplace culture going forward? The stuff around the commute. How do we tackle that issue that men sort of need to have a commute? That's not right. How do we have more flexible working? I'm trying to think what else was on the plan. More paternity leave. Exactly, it's time in, and now is the time to make the case for that. Because gender equality has to be built into Building Back Better, because gender equality frees up lots of money in the economy. And the economy is going to need help. I keep saying, any government who does not, build their entire plan to some extent around gender equality is a sexist government. End of. Okay, because you can make life better for everyone, and you can free up tons of cash to boost the economy if you focus on gender equality. And if you don't, then why not? Other than you are a bunch of men. And let's face it, they are all men, you're a bunch of men in Downing Street who don't really get it, care. So, I really think, we have to be sort of thinking now about how we do, keep the gains of lockdown. And there have been some, amongst all the, I always say, heaven knows, we would rather not be where we are now in so many ways. And yet it's okay to sort of say, this has been horrific and awful, and if we could turn the clock back 12 months, we would. We can't, so let's look for what the gains are and try and take them forward because otherwise, what's it all been for?
Oh, exactly. And as you say, seize the opportunity now while it's there, while it's fresh, and let's not go back to what it was in, I say, 6 months' time, when we've got this opportunity to really get some momentum behind it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was planning to sort of launch that at the start of the year, but again, another thing that
New Year's resolution out the window.
But just because I don't think people want to think about that stuff right now, I think that's understandable. I didn't, because my brain was scrambled in that first week in January when oh god, right, we're back into homeschooling again. How do we do that and all that stuff. I couldn't think about anything strategic, and I don't think other people could either. But now we're beginning to move on. People are beginning to settle into it. We're beginning to get maybe beginning to get an idea of how the future might play out in lots of different options. It's maybe time to start thinking about making that case again and campaigning again. People might have the capacity to listen.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Now, I don't want to change the subject entirely, but I am going to, because I'm aware that we've got limited time together on this particular episode, and I'm really interested in, I suppose, what you're doing around the gender stereotyping. And obviously the book that you've written, The Gender Agenda, the first book you wrote, was all around that. So without any specific question around it, I just really want to get your thoughts, really, and your views around gender stereotyping and how we can, I suppose, all support your campaign, I guess, to keep things more equal between, I suppose, boys and girls. We talk about children.
Yeah, I mean, it started, well, you could buy the book, you get the story. But it was sort of inspired by a project or a book, a German book from, where are we at, 40 years ago now, called There's a Good Girl. And it was brought to our attention. And so we started a Twitter account charting all the ways our son and daughter were treated differently. And very much that was about, as feminists going, right, we're going to show how unfair the world is to our daughter, and we're going to bust down those barricades and make it fair. But we came out of that project, I mean, instruction, it wasn't literally start as a project, it was just something to sort of maybe might be interesting, something to do. But we, eventually after a few years, you begin to go mad because you just see the stereotyping everywhere, and you can't sort of switch it off. So we had to sort of draw a line under it to some extent, not draw a line under it, but roll it back a bit. But we came out of it with two sort of big takeaways. One was actually the stereotypes are damaging our son almost as much as our daughter. Stereotypes affect everyone and constrict everyone and damage everyone. And that sort of led on to Dads Don't Babysit, because you start thinking about when do these stereotypes really begin to hurt? And it's particularly, I think, when men become dads that they haven't been raised to think about what that means and how they want to be a father and all this sort of stuff. And the other takeaway was that we are the biggest influence on our children's lives. It was all about, right, let's go bust everybody else up for being big sexist. And it was like, oh right, actually it's us.
No pressure.
We live in society. I'm all for. I've lots of time for people who want to try and raise their children gender neutral, but unless you keep them in a cardboard box, I can't see how it can be done, because they've got to go out into the world and they're going to be subject to gender stereotyping. So that's kind of that's how it started and where it went. And I mean, gosh, I haven't got a copy to hand, but I can still remember some of the terrible stories. I mean, the one I like to repeat over and over again is when I was, me and some other dads had our kids together. I think we were watching rugby, how very
manly.
And the kids were sort of playing together. And one of the dads had kids same age as mine, and the girl was showing off her ballet moves because she'd been to ballet that morning. And her little brother then copied what she'd done, and he said, "Oh, look at him! He's a right little Jean-Claude Van Damme."
Oh goodness!
Like, hang on, he's doing exactly the same moves. And yet when she does it, it's ballet dancing, and when he does it, it's fighting. That kind of summed it up. Which, oh god. But I mean, there was loads of other excuses. I think it started one of the very first anecdotes in the book is when we went to a panto with the kids were small. And I don't know, I don't think they had this when I was younger, but I sound very old, but they now sell all sorts of horrific plastic flashing lights.
Yes, they do.
And one of the kids, went to the stall, picked up one of these flashing lights, which happened to have a pink handle, and the woman at the stall said, "Oh, shall I get you one of them in blue?" Immediately it was, he's a boy.
Yeah.
He can't have a pink one. That's just, he must want a blue one, right? And it's like, well, why?
It's ingrained, isn't it? It's just ingrained.
But of course, he then takes that message on board and goes, "Oh, I must want it in blue because I'm a boy and boys want blue, right?" So that's, it's an adult saying very much explaining this stuff to it. So that's sort of where it all started, and it remains a huge issue around stereotypes. But the biggest way to break stereotypes is to role model, is to do things different. And there's plenty of research that if boys, or if children see their dads doing more work around the house, they will do more work around. Boys will grow up, do more work around the house, and that makes life. And girls will expect their male partners or their partners to do more around the house. So that's the biggest way to bust stereotypes, is to challenge, is to role model an alternative. We also had lists in the book of children's books and films that offer different role models, because again, I haven't got the figures to hand, but the vast majority of children's books have male protagonists, or at least the male protagonists do stuff while the female protagonists care, or the male protagonists tend to have more words or whatever. It is skewed quite badly, but there are books out there that feature female protagonists, and books that feature same-sex families and all sorts of different role models. You've just, unfortunately, you've got to sort of perhaps look a little bit harder to find them, but you don't have to look that hard. And the same with film. The number of kids' films that are led by male characters. I went to see it's not so bad these days. I went to see a lot of Tinkerbell films, because we were all about trying to find films with female protagonists. Really, back then it was really only Tinkerbell. Although, to be fair, Tinkerbell's quite good. Tinkerbell's quite a good role model.
She's a pretty strong little fairy.
Yeah, she's basically in the films. So she's all right. I mean, I remember having to go and see them and thinking, oh god. To be honest, probably one or two Tinkerbell films is enough. I think I've seen the but of course, these days, the game changer was when Rey turned up in Star Wars. Like, whoa! I mean, that's massive. Yeah. Suddenly, the world was turned upside down. He was an amazing female role model in the biggest franchise in the world. Yeah. And that made a big difference. So it is a lot better these days. We sort of started talking about what's changed, and certainly in terms of role models and stereotypes, a lot has changed. I mean, there's still a long way to go, but things are certainly better in that regard.
So what's your view then on, there was a big furore about the old Disney films, wasn't there, last year or maybe before last, and all of the fairy tales, which are very obviously stereotypically, the victim is the woman and the prince comes and saves her, and they wanted to rewrite them or ban them or all this kind of stuff. My personal view is that is just how it was then. You can't erase history. There's a lot to be said for history and where it has brought us today. So what's your view on those older perceptions of gender stereotyping? Where should they sit now in a more modern society?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that, actually. I mean, I certainly have a lot of sympathy with the idea that fairy tales are part of our culture, and you sort of need to know them. You need to get the references, because they're obviously referenced all over the place. But I also have a certain amount of sympathy with, you could probably go through life without knowing Cinderella, all right. I think the answer is communication again. By all means, watch them, but talk about them. It's say, well, why is that? What's going on there? We've got in a habit of watching the old Top of the Pops on a Friday night. They show on BBC4. And it's amazing that the ones from the 80s the women are all, all wearing clothes essentially, and as you get into their clothes all seem to disappear. It's like, something slow over time. They seem to wear less. And my daughter will sit and watch it, and we will say, "Oh, hang on, what's going on here? Why is this man singing in a suit and the women around him are wearing bikinis? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, either he's very hot or they're very cold, And you just have to sort of point out stuff. You don't have to be po-faced and boring about it. But you still you need to challenge it where you see it, but you don't need to challenge it in a in an aggressive way or as a boring way. You just need to plant the seed and talk about it, and you'll have some really interesting conversations with your children.
Exactly. You promote independent thought in them as well, then, don't you, to have their views on the things they're seeing, which may not be in line with what they're being taught or what we're pushing on them. So I think it's really valuable for them to be exposed to as much as possible.
Yeah. I think, like I say, I would be wary of, pronouncing on that one. I think if people want to ban the old Disney fairy tales, I would be very on board with that. But I'd also be on board with watching them and talking about them. Enchanted, definitely. That's the one to go for. Enchanted.
Okay, yes, that's I think I have seen that one. Yes,
that's the one with the princess that falls out of the cartoon world. I mean, she's not terribly gung ho, but it kind of turns it on its head a bit.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much. I think we're probably coming to the end of our allocated time now, which is, as with most of my guests, I probably could talk for hours and hours about a variety of topics. So I'll have you on again, I'm sure, in the future. So if anybody wants to get hold of you for any reason, whether it's to work, to collaborate, or to find out more, I guess, about everything you're working on, then what's the best way to find you?
That's the best way to be. I'm Political Yeti on Twitter, and we are at Working Dads on Twitter as well. Very much, if you have taken extra paternity leave, done shared parental leave, I want to hear from you, because case studies are hugely important in driving change. Just by talking to me and telling me that you did shared parental leave, and everybody I speak to that did shared parental leave said they loved it. There's different stories about how they took it and why they took it. It's not all the bed of roses, but if you're working differently, I want to hear about it, because just half an hour talking to me, you can genuinely make a big difference, because I can then put that in front of lots of other men who will read that and think, okay, I might try that too. So get it through Twitter or on workingdads.co.uk. There's plenty of ways to message us there. Please do message me. workingmums.co.uk gets tons of questions and content and messages all the time, because women are good at asking questions and talking. I sit on Working Dads just waiting for somebody to send me a message. So, stop me from being lonely and just send me a message. Send me your thoughts on anything I'm writing. Or like I say, if you've got, I'm happy to take blogs from people who want to write about issues, and I'm very happy to hear case studies. Find us on Twitter, or just head to workingdads.co.uk and you'll be able to get in touch there.
Cool. And I also do what I can to spread that message and get more working dads to step up and have that conversation with you too.
Brilliant.
So thank you so much, James. It's been great to have you on. Have a lovely day in the sunshine today, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Straight off into another meeting now. I know. My co-worker
non-interrupted, and a nice day with your co-worker, I hope, as well, to follow.
My co-worker had a Zoom meeting with one of his co-workers to work out the Tudor family tree after that.
Thank you so much, James. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. We'll be in touch. Thanks.
Bye.
What a fantastic, insightful conversation with James. And he was absolutely right to pick me up at the start of our conversation. The reason he's all about the rights of working dads is to help working mums. Making life better for men will make life better for women. It's refreshing to hear someone speak so candidly about gender equality, and please do get in touch with him if you have any stories to share. So see you next time on The Parent Equation, where I'll be joined by Alice Stapleton, a career coach and mum of one.